Hey guys, it's Size. With the Dragonflight pre-patch in full swing, I thought it was about time I do another State of Shadow Priest video, roughly going over how I feel, how the community feels, the strengths, the weaknesses, and the different bugs that we've got at the minute. Just for the people that care about the gameplay in the background, this is the talent set that I ran for this dungeon. We will look at the damage breakdown at the end of the video, but I just thought I'd put a visual up on the screen. I have been playing Psychic Link, but through some suggestions from the Shadow Priest Discord and some of my viewers, I have swapped to Dark Evangelism instead. This is mainly because it buffs your AoE and single target at the same time, whereas Psychic Link only affects your AoE damage, and the numbers is quite iffy at the minute. This is also the gear that I've been using. By no stretch of the imagination is it the best, but I'm running the Shadowflame Prism Legendary. I am playing Necrolord, and I have the Nizzle Mastery Trinket. So, the big one. Let's talk bugs. So, over every single pre-patch that we've ever had, it is normal for quite a few classes to have bugs, things that don't work, things that get fixed later on. But Shadow have had pretty heavy bugs that actively affect how we play the game. So, just a quick list. We have Mindseer, which has been bugged, where it wouldn't allow you to cast Mindseer. That appears to be fixed. Mindbender, if you use Glyph of the Voidling or any other glyph effect in Mindbender, will put it on a 3-minute cooldown and it won't generate sanity. Screams, which is a talent, it doesn't work with other talents, which is pretty frustrating. And you've got the Insanity Bar bug, where your Insanity Bar will disappear if you go from Void Eruption to Dark Ascension. It's not a UI bug, it actively just disappears. And there is a fix for that. So public found a fix for it, and essentially other things can be broken, but public only found these main issues with it. I'll put a WeakAuras in the description down below that he has created or had somebody create, so it tells you when it's disappeared and it's not a UI error, so you can relog or toggle shadow form to fix it. So, in the grand scheme of things, how does Priest feel? In high keystones, Priest feels pretty good. The Insanity generation is good in AoE. The Mind Devourer procs for Mindseer on a big pack. If you get 3 back-to-back procs, you can burst easily over 100k, especially with Shadowflame Prism and the fact that you've got your double Mind Blasts, your 3 Mind Blasts with Void Eruption as well. But a lot of people still aren't happy with how it performs on single target, and people have been asking for changes. So, for example, one change that somebody wanted to make was for Halo to actually generate Insanity. Something that Blizzard could take on board, but it really just depends on how they feel about it. But at the minute, Insanity generation on single target is rough. You're stood there casting Mindflay Insanity. If you have to move, that talent's useless. You're not generating enough sanity to keep DP up 100% of the time in some situations. People really don't like Mind Spike. Understandably, it doesn't feel engaging, it doesn't feel rewarding. And of course, it's nice getting the procs if you go down the talent tree. But people are actively making talent builds that make it so that you're not using Mind Spike. And some of the weaknesses that I've felt with the spec at the minute is that the Mind Spike build actually feels non-rewarding. You're forced to press the procs regardless of what priority list we make. There's a lack of sustained single target in comparison to other classes, but again, this will probably get tuned closer to Vault of the Incarnate. There's no heroic week. It's mythic and heroic in the same week, so tuning will have to come mythic week or just before, depending on how Blizzard feels. The button bloat that you experience whenever you spec into Dark Ascension and Mind Spike, regardless of any other talent, there's too many. You've got Halo or Divine Star, you've got Mind Spike, Dark Ascension, Mind Blast, Devouring Plague. It's a hell of a lot of abilities, and Blizzard feel the need to make all of these abilities interact when some buttons could just be there just to do damage. There's no need to have every single button interact with each other. It would be nice to just have a button that does damage and you don't have to think about it. So it would be nice to see every single Shadowy Apparition apply a stack of Idol in Azoth, but Blizzard aren't going to change that. That is intentional. Every single cast of Mindseer counts as one Shadowy Apparition. That's not a bug. That's just how they want it to play. And I somewhat understand it. Imagine the amount of N'Zoth ads you could have out if every single tick from your Mind Seer counted toward the shadowy apparition. It would be insane. Another little weakness is that the removal of the extra shadowy apparitions on a crit, it's quite noticeable. The insanity gen, the fact that it's not generating idle N'Zoth stacks, and given the fact that on single target, that was quite useful to have that extra insanity generation, even if it's only giving you one extra insanity. On a crit, it's... So to put it into perspective, a crit build before was viable because you would gain extra insanity from having crits from your shadowy apparitions. Now without that, crit is pretty underwhelming. You don't really take it at the minute. It might change going forward, but the insanity generation because of this change on single target is significant and it is really noticeable. So, all that doom and gloom out the way. Strengths. The strengths for Shadow are in the form of burst AoE. So you've got Shadow Crash applying to 8 targets now. You're getting Mind Devourer procs relatively often, and it feels quite nice when you do get them because you can get them back to back. Even if you don't, the insanity generation on AoE is pretty fluid, so you find yourself being able to press Mind Seer more often than not. Idle N'Zoth damage actually feels pretty good. In this dungeon, I'll show it at the end of the video, but I think it did close to 8 or 9% damage. It was pretty nice, considering it cleaves now, which is something that the community wanted for a while. So, even with the shadowy apparition above, it scaled pretty well, and hopefully it scales going forward into Vault of the Incarnate and Dragonflight as well. So, on top of that, it's nice knowing that when we get all of our talent, the spec will feel a little bit better. Not necessarily gameplay wise, you can't really expect much to change in the form of gameplay and how you play the spec, but you can expect it to do more damage in the fact that you will have your Echoing Void, your Idle N'Zoth, and your Mindbender Shadowflame Prism talent. It'll be nice to have all of these open to us and not just, you know, sacrificing some. Healing. Self-healing is really high, just through the Devouring Plague itself. I don't really need healing in keys or raids, and the group healing is extremely strong. You've got Void Eruption, Halo, Power Word Shield, and when you use Void Eruption with Power Infusion or Void Eruption, you can essentially solo heal a whole pack, or a good, 20 seconds of a fight, providing you're doing enough damage and there are adds. And there's a lot of utility. So I've heard a lot of people say that Shadow lacks utility at the minute. We have access to Master Spell, Life Grip, Void Eruption, Stamina Buff, Power Infusion, and yeah, I understand the PI argument where a guild could just take a Disc or a Holy Priest, but what if the Priest healers aren't doing enough output for the next raid? Right, the next best thing is to take a Shadow Priest and ensure that you're having PI on an extra target in your raid. If you're not going for world first content, chances are your raid leader will actually care about this and they'll try and get in Shadow Priest just to have that PI on an extra member of the raid. So in terms of the damage breakdown, a lot of our damage comes from dots. It is a dot spec and it's being treated as such. For those people that haven't played Shadow, or people that have played Shadow for quite a while, you'll know that it's always been a mix of Devouring Plague damage or Mind Flay. And people are primarily upset because in Shadowlands they had access to Searing Nightmare. They saw the burst it could do, and now it's been taken away and it's not been replaced with instant burst damage. So people are upset now the Shadow doesn't have the same burst damage, but people were also upset that Searing Nightmare played the way it did. It wasn't intuitive, it wasn't a fun style of gameplay, but they had a button they could press and top the meters. I think that's where a lot of the animosity stems from for Shadow Priests that have played in Shadowlands Mythic Plus. So, understandable when it's not been replaced with something that fills the gap. Instead, we've now been given a multi-dot Shadow Crash, scaling Mind Seer damage, which doesn't do the same damage, but in my eyes, and I feel like it actually feels better than pressing Searing Nightmare. I think a lot of people will actively disagree with that because it doesn't feel as strong. But in terms of gameplay and how the spec feels to play because of that, I think it's better. Again, that's subjective. You might think differently. You're entitled to it. But from the people that I've spoke to, they miss Searing Nightmare for the damage, not because it felt nice to press. Whereas Shadow Crush and Mind Saver at the minute actually feel pretty nice to press, especially when you get the procs. So the rotation generally feels pretty nice on AoE, providing you're not taking Mind Spike. Again, you can. There are builds that allow you to do that, but it will make the rotation feel very clunky, and that's just the way it is. That's not necessarily an opinion, that's just the way that the spec is built at the minute. So I think Halo is in a pretty good spot as a talent. It's DPS neutral on single target, so you can just use it for the healing. It doesn't have the min-max of being a certain distance away anymore. It just does the max amount of healing and damage. And it's a big burst of healing. You know, especially in a raid, if you're dropping a healer, or a healer dies on a raid mechanic, and let's say, for example, it was a Disc Priest, and they were about to ramp that, Halo isn't going to fix it, but it does a big chunk of healing on the majority of the raid. And it's very valuable. That is a utility talent that you could use to potentially save the life of some raids and some encounters. So it's good on AoE to give quite a bit of burst to the spec, but I do think the idea of making it give insanity should be a thing. Just for the flow of the rotation, you feel like you're using it on an opener, so you gain insanity straight away. You can get straight into DP or Mind Seer depending on how many targets there are. But overall, I would be lying if I think the spec is perfect and that all the doom and gloom is negative and not required, because there are issues and there are changes that Blizzard should probably make to help the spec. When an entire community is shouting for it, it generally gets done. So people come in and they say, you know, are you not worried about the spec? You know, they have a point, things like that. I understand that, but I'm not worried about it. I have a trust issue with Blizzard from the past few expansions and my classes that I've played. But generally, the changes that they've made, albeit a bit late, have actively helped make the spec better. And I do think we're going to get that treatment with Shadow Priest. Of course, they could have communicated a lot better over the course of the changes and responded to the community, but they haven't, and we can't change that. The only thing we can do is be patient, continue giving feedback, and hope that it gets implemented. I've actually found that I've got a pretty decent voice so far in the Shadow community, so I'm still not on the level of public and such, but I'm getting quite a lot of views on my streams, and people are asking me a lot of questions that I'm, you know, thinking about going back to the Priest Discord, communicating with people, and you know, it makes me feel like part of the community when I'm putting up videos like these, and I'm talking in the Discord, and people are actually agreeing with the views. So it is split, and you know, a lot of people just flat out aren't happy. Some people understand and agree with me in the sense of it's not in a good spot, but we have trust that it'll get fixed. Completely up to you what you think, but it's not that I'm ignoring the issues. I'm just not worried. I think it'll get fixed. If it doesn't, I'll continue to play the spec because I love it and I love the class fantasy, and we'll just have to see where it goes. But Shadow isn't necessarily in a bad place. We aren't Arms Warriors, but neither are we bottom of the meters. We bring a lot to the raid, and we bring a lot of dungeon content, but people need to give it a chance. You know, there is always that in the back of people's mind, Shadow Priest isn't good in keys. Shadow Priest hasn't been good in keys for a while. So the community perception is just that Priest isn't good. That'll take a while to change, but hopefully in Dragonflight, as people see Priest in keys and raids, hopefully doing good numbers and bringing stuff, hopefully that changes and the community perception becomes a little bit more positive, because then, you know, the average Priest gets invited to more content, they feel like their spec's actually competitive, and hopefully it will be. But please don't be swayed off playing Priest because the community are slating it so much. It's understandable, and these are people that have played Priest for a long time, so the frustration is real, but don't let that sway new people off playing it. You shouldn't. If it's what you want to play, and you're playing casually, or you're not playing at a world first level, you can play it, and you won't negatively impact your raid or your dungeon group. You will fit in. Don't worry about that, please. So, of course, the higher end the content that you join in with, there'll be clear-cut builds that are the best, but unless you're participating in the top tier of content, feel free to play whatever you want. The nice thing is with these new talent builds is that it is all completely optional. You can play what you want. But with that team, I will leave the rest of the dungeon to run. There will be some clips in between here and Sorry, getting tongue-tied. There will be some clips between Morose and Achuman, but generally, I'm happy where Priest is. Of course, there's changes that need made, and that'll all get sorted, but don't let the general community consensus put you off playing Priest. You know, I've played with quite a few people that wanted to play Priest in Dragonflight, and they've been worried about the community perception. You shouldn't let that affect if you're going to play a class or not. If you like Priest, or if you've been playing Priest for a while, and you're good at it, you should stick with it. But that's completely your choice. You have options, you know, you're not forced into one spec. Dragonflight being such an alt-friendly expansion means that you could easily have two characters up. Most of the comments are you going to be playing Shadow or Affliction or Shadow or Warlock? I'm playing both. I don't have a lot of free time outside of the game. But with Dragonflight, a lot of the content is, you know, it's account-wide now. You can min-max, you can do whatever you want on your main, and it'll probably copy over to your alt. So please feel free to make the most of that. You know, don't resign yourself to one class, especially if you're in a raiding guild and you're really worried about Shadow Priest. You know, just make an alt, even if you don't have a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of time to maintain it, especially since the only barrier to entry in Dragonflight is just gearing up. But with that team, I will leave a link for my builds video in the description. I will put the WeakAuras to let you know if your Insanity bar is bugged in the description. And people have been asking for a link for my Plater and my WeakAuras. They're not mine. The WeakAuras I just got off Waggo. I normally use Atrocity's WeakAuras, but since he's not updated the UI yet, since he's busy doing a lot of other things, and a lot of the add-ons that he uses weren't updated, I'm using these. I will put them in the description anyway, because people want to see, and people want to use the WeakAuras that they see in the video, and that's great. So, props to the guy that made them. I'll throw it all in the description. My streams have been doing really well recently, so if you wouldn't mind just dropping me a like, or a subscribe on YouTube, or a follow on Twitch, I'd really appreciate it. I'm going to be streaming most nights. Might be quite late, it just depends on the day. I've got a busy real life, and this is a hobby at the end of the day. You know, I enjoy putting out this content. I enjoy helping people understand Shadow and putting my opinions out, since people seem to care. But with that team, I'll jump back into the video at the end, at the damage breakdown. But thank you so much for watching if you got this far, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. So, coming up to the end of the dungeon now, I'm going to put the damage breakdown on the screen. Mine's here extremely high. You'd understand that in a lower Karazhan. A lot of the procs we used on big pulls, we had a tank on comms, which meant that the pulls were communicated. I knew what he was going to pull when he was going to pull it. That made it so I knew when to save Mindbender, Void Eruption, all my cooldowns like that. Halo did 3%, pretty decent. I was toying around with the idea of playing Divine Star. I might try that again, especially when in a lot of these dungeons you end up in a melee setting anyway. I'm thinking from beyond damage, as I mentioned earlier, up to 9%. That's huge. It's a lot of damage. But with that team, feel free to pause the video, have a little in-depth look at that if you'd like. But thank you so much for watching. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.